The night was quiet yet heavy with the sound of the city breathing. Keanu Reeves sat near the window of an old hotel room, staring at the streets below. His next charity event was in the morning, but his mind was not on fame or lights. It was on a single message he received hours ago from Sandra Bullock. Her voice note had cracked halfway through, saying only 5 words. "Someone needs us tonight, Keanu." Without a second thought, he left his room, grabbed his jacket, and ran down. The rain started to pour as if the world was warning him to stay back. But he did not stop, not when Sandra sounded scared. She was his closest friend, the only one who understood his quiet heart. Miles away, Sandra stood outside a closed subway station holding a backpack close. Inside the bag was a small drive given to her by a trembling boy. He claimed it had something that could expose a plan to harm hundreds. The boy disappeared into the dark before she could ask anything. She waited for Keanu near the old clock tower as the rain grew harder. When he reached her, his eyes asked questions she could not answer. "Do you trust me?" she whispered softly. "Always," Keanu said, pulling her under his jacket. Together they entered the underground station, guided only by dim red lights. A strange humming sound filled the air, like machines breathing beneath their feet. Keanu noticed hidden wires across the walls and a timer blinking faintly. The drive in Sandra's hand vibrated, showing a map of the tunnels below. The dots on the screen pulsed in rhythm with the timer. His face turned pale as he realized what it meant. "Someone planted charges here," he said in a low voice. Sandra's hands trembled, but her voice stayed calm. "We cannot call the police. The system is hacked. We have to stop it ourselves." They followed the path deeper into the tunnels, water dripping from every crack. Keanu stopped to look at a small poster of missing children taped to a wall. It reminded him why he still believed in kindness even in chaos. "Let's finish this," he said with quiet strength. As they reached the main control room, a door creaked open by itself. Inside stood a man in a security uniform with tired eyes and shaking hands. "You should not be here," he said, voice breaking. "If you touch that panel, it all goes off." Keanu stepped forward, calm and fearless. "Then tell me how to stop it," he said gently. The man looked between them, torn between fear and guilt. "You will not understand," he whispered, tears forming. "I was told my family would die if I disobeyed." Sandra's eyes softened, her voice turning kind. "Then let us help you save them." The man hesitated, then slowly handed them a small key card. "It shuts down the central timer." "But you only have 5 minutes." Before they could thank him, a shadow moved behind the door. A gun clicked, echoing louder than thunder. The unknown figure shouted, "No one leaves alive!" Keanu pulled Sandra behind a pillar as the first bullet shattered the control panel glass. Sandra's voice trembled. "Keanu, what do we do now?" He took a deep breath, looked into her eyes, and said calmly, "We protect them. All of them." His words carried a weight deeper than fear. Because at that moment he was not just an actor or hero. He was a man ready to take the bullet if it meant saving others. And as the red timer blinked faster on the wall, the world held its breath. The tunnel echoed with the sound of running footsteps and heavy rain dripping from the ceiling. Keanu held Sandra's hand tightly as they moved through the narrow passage. Behind them, the armed man's voice echoed like thunder. "You have no idea what you're stopping," he shouted in anger. Keanu didn't respond. His mind was focused on one thing only, the people above. Sandra breathed fast but steady, her eyes fixed on the glowing timer map. 4 minutes left, she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Keanu stopped near a rusty junction box. Wires scattered like veins of chaos. He stared at the blinking light, trying to understand the system. Sandra crouched beside him, her fingers trembling as she opened the control lid. "I can't believe this is real," she said softly. Keanu nodded, his tone calm but heavy. "It's real, but so are we. Let's make it count." The red numbers flashed like a heartbeat ready to stop. He found the right wire and began pulling out the old screwdriver he always carried. Sandra smiled weakly, remembering the stories he once told her. "You still carry that from your bike trips?" she asked. He nodded, a small smile breaking his serious face. "Sometimes small things save lives." Suddenly, the sound of boots echoed closer. The armed man was near, shouting orders into his radio. "They're in Sector 3. Finish them now," Keanu whispered. "We need to split. I'll distract them. You get to the core." Sandra shook her head, refusing instantly. "We started this together. We end it together." Before they could argue, two more men appeared from the shadows. The flickering lights made their faces look ghostly and cold. Keanu raised his hands slowly, keeping calm. "We don't want trouble," he said softly. One of them laughed darkly. "You already are the trouble." Without warning, the first man aimed his gun. The shot rang out, echoing like thunder through the tunnels. Keanu pushed Sandra to the side, the bullet grazing his arm. He fell back with a groan, clutching the wound tightly. Sandra's eyes filled with fear but also determination. She grabbed the backpack and threw it at the shooter's legs, tripping him. The drive slid across the wet floor, its light still blinking. Keanu forced himself up, pain written across his face. He kicked the gun away and disarmed the man with a swift motion. The second attacker hesitated, his hands shaking. "Please," Sandra said, "you don't have to do this. Help us instead." The man froze, lowering his weapon slowly. "My brother is trapped in the north tunnel," he muttered. Sandra's voice softened. "Then help us stop this. No one has to die." He nodded, breathing heavily, torn between fear and hope. Keanu pressed his hand against his bleeding arm and said quietly, "Take us there. We'll save him and everyone else." They moved quickly, guided by the reluctant guard through the dripping tunnels. The sound of sirens faintly echoed from above, distant but growing. 3 minutes, Sandra whispered, eyes on the timer. Her heart raced, every second feeling like an hour. They reached the north tunnel where a small device pulsed with a red glow. "That's the main one," the guard said. "If it goes off, everything collapses." Keanu stepped forward, breathing deeply to calm his shaking hands. "Sandra, pass me the key card." She pulled it from her pocket, her fingers brushing his in a moment of trust. The world seemed to slow as he slid the card into the panel. A faint click echoed, followed by a cold, mechanical voice. "Override sequence initiated. Password required." Sandra's heart sank. "We don't have a password." Keanu closed his eyes, thinking fast. Then he noticed something etched faintly on the wall beside the panel. It was a small carving of 3 letters. "MAN," he read quietly. He typed it in, unsure why, but hoping it meant something. The screen flashed green, unlocking the safety system. The timer stopped for a moment, then resumed at double speed. "It triggered a backup," Sandra gasped. The sirens grew louder. The water dripped faster. Keanu clenched his jaw. "There's another core, isn't there?" The guard nodded, panic taking over. "South tunnel. Only one person can reach it in time." Sandra turned to Keanu, her eyes full of tears. "Then I'm going. You're bleeding." He shook his head slowly, his voice calm and firm. "If you go, I follow. We finish this together." They ran toward the south tunnel, splashing through water and broken cables. The air grew thicker, the sound of ticking filling every corner. Sandra shouted over the noise. "Keanu, if we fail—" He interrupted softly. "Then we fail trying to save everyone." As they reached the end of the tunnel, the final control unit glowed red. Sandra plugged in the drive and started the override. Keanu covered her, watching every shadow that moved. The screen blinked, showing progress loading slowly. 70%, 80, 90, then error. A hidden voice echoed from the speakers, cold and distant. "You can't stop what has already begun." Keanu looked around, trying to locate the voice. "Who are you?" he shouted. The voice replied, "Someone who lost faith in kindness." The lights flickered violently as the system rebooted itself. Sandra screamed, "Keanu, we're out of time!" He looked at the countdown, 2 minutes left. His expression softened as he whispered, "Then let's give the world those 2 minutes." He turned to her, eyes calm but determined, and smiled faintly. "If this is where it ends, at least it ends with kindness." Sandra felt her heart break as the timer hit 1 minute 50. Together they placed their hands on the final switch, and somewhere far above, the city lights flickered as if holding its breath. The countdown echoed through the tunnels like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Each tick of the clock made the ground tremble. Each second felt like eternity. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock stood shoulder to shoulder, their hands gripping the final switch. The digital timer on the wall blinked red and angry, showing less than 2 minutes. Rainwater dripped through the cracks above, turning into small streams that flowed across their boots. The air smelled of dust, metal, and fear. "We can still make it," Sandra said breathlessly. Keanu looked at her with calm eyes, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We don't give up, not now. Not ever." Her eyes softened at his words, feeling strength return to her trembling body. They began pulling wires, connecting circuits, trying to override the sequence. But every time they fixed one connection, another spark burst to life nearby. "It's like it's fighting us," Sandra muttered, frustrated. "Then we fight back," Keanu replied, voice quiet but filled with resolve. Suddenly, the speakers crackled again with the same cold, distorted voice. "You think kindness can stop what the world has already become?" Keanu froze, recognizing the faint tremor behind the distortion. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The voice chuckled darkly, filled with bitterness. "Someone who used to believe in saving people. Someone like you." The tension in the room grew thick. Sandra's eyes widened as she glanced at the digital feed from the drive. A face began to form on the flickering screen, half shadow, half light. It was an older man with scars across his cheek and eyes full of regret. His badge, barely visible under the dust, read, "Agent Miles Reed." Keanu whispered the name under his breath. He remembered that name from an old Foundation report years ago. Miles was a rescue engineer who had vanished during a failed subway evacuation. The world had called him a hero once, until a system glitch cost dozens of lives. The government blamed him, and he disappeared without a trace. "You tried to save people?" Keanu said softly, his voice echoing. "And now you want to destroy them?" The man on the screen shook his head. "I tried saving the ungrateful. They let me rot. They forgot." His voice cracked with pain and anger. "This world only remembers explosions, not efforts. Maybe it needs one more to learn." Sandra stepped closer to the monitor, her tone calm and full of empathy. "You're wrong. People remember kindness more than hate." Miles's eyes flickered for a moment, as if her words struck something deep inside. But then his tone turned cold again. "You have 1 minute. Walk away and I'll spare you both." Keanu's hand tightened on the switch. "We're not leaving. If you lost faith in kindness, we'll remind you what it feels like." The screen glitched violently, his laughter filling the tunnels. "You can't win, Reeves. You'll die here like the rest." Keanu looked at Sandra, his voice turning gentle. "If that's what it takes to save them, then so be it." Sandra felt tears form, but she refused to blink. "Then we die saving, not watching." They pulled the last lever together, but the panel sparked violently. The screen turned black, and the timer froze at 1 minute exactly. The silence that followed was deafening. Keanu's breathing slowed as he stared at the frozen numbers. "Did we stop it?" Sandra whispered. A small beep answered her question. The timer reset itself to 10 minutes. Keanu exhaled, a mix of relief and confusion. But then, a soft static sound filled the air, followed by a new voice. It wasn't Miles this time. It was a young boy's voice. "Hello. Are you the good people my dad talked about?" Sandra looked around, confused. "Who's speaking?" The voice came again, trembling but innocent. "My name is Liam Reed. My dad told me someone kind would come." Keanu's eyes widened as realization hit him. "That's Miles' son," he said softly. On the monitor, a second video began playing. A small room appeared. A boy sitting beside an old radio, tears in his eyes. He was speaking into a mic, hoping someone would hear him. "Dad said the system might hurt people. He wanted to stop it, but he got trapped." Sandra gasped, covering her mouth in shock. "Oh my God, Miles isn't behind this. He's trying to stop it from inside." Keanu's heart raced as he pieced it together. The distorted voice they heard earlier wasn't Miles. It was the program itself. The system had overridden his controls and was using his identity. Miles had become trapped while trying to dismantle his own creation. "Liam," Keanu said into the comm, his voice soft but urgent. "Where is your father now?" The boy sniffled and pointed the camera toward a locked control chamber. Behind the glass, Miles sat slumped over a terminal, sparks flying around him. He was alive, but barely conscious. Sandra's hands shook as she turned to Keanu. "We can still save him." Keanu nodded, already moving. "Show us the route, Liam. We're coming for him." They ran through the narrow tunnels, guided by the boys' directions. Their footsteps splashed through ankle-deep water, and the rumbling above grew louder. Sirens wailed in the distance as emergency teams began arriving. But down here, it was just the two of them against time itself. They reached the sealed chamber door. It was reinforced with multiple locks and a biometric scanner. Sandra examined the keypad, her eyes scanning rapidly. "We need his handprint to open it." Keanu pressed his hand against the glass, seeing Miles stir faintly. "Miles, can you hear me?" "It's Keanu." The man lifted his head weakly, his voice almost gone. "The system took control. I tried to stop it." Keanu nodded. "We know, but we can still end it." Miles looked at them through the glass, his eyes filled with regret. "The override key is under the console, but it's locked by my pulse." Sandra's mind raced. His pulse? Keanu. That means he has to stay alive. Keanu finished, determination hardening his tone. Together they worked to connect the external wires from the panel. Keanu gritted his teeth as the electric current shocked his fingers. Sandra held the flashlight, her heart pounding. Every few seconds she glanced at the timer. 8 minutes left. Suddenly, Liam's voice came again. "Please save my dad. He didn't mean to hurt anyone." Sandra smiled sadly. "We will, Liam. We promise." Keanu pushed one final wire into the socket and the door hissed open slightly. Smoke poured out, filling the air with a metallic smell. Miles collapsed forward, coughing and weak. Keanu rushed in, lifting him onto his shoulder despite the pain in his arm. Sandra plugged the drive into the console, ready to finish what Miles started. But just as she did, the monitors around them flickered again. A new message appeared on every screen. "Core detonation locked. Manual override required inside blast chamber." Keanu turned to Sandra, his face pale. "It means one of us has to stay in there to stop it." Sandra stared at him, disbelief flooding her face. "No, there has to be another way." Keanu shook his head slowly. "Sometimes saving everyone means not saving ourselves." She stepped closer, tears welling in her eyes. "Then we both stay." He smiled faintly, brushing rain from her cheek. "No, you're the hope, Sandra. The world still needs your light." But before he could finish, Miles grabbed his arm weakly. "No one dies today," he whispered. His trembling hand pointed toward the emergency lever. "There's a way to redirect the blast underground, but it will flood the tunnels." Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look. If they redirected it, they might save the city, but be trapped below. Sandra exhaled slowly, her voice steady. "Then let's do it together." As they moved toward the lever, the timer hit 6 minutes. Sirens wailed, alarms screamed, and the walls began to shake. Keanu turned to Sandra one last time, his voice calm and soft. "Whatever happens next, remember, kindness always wins." The lever clicked. The floor rumbled, and the screen flashed white as the flood rushed in. The blast never came as fire, it came as water. The tunnels roared like a beast, awakening from centuries of sleep. Within seconds, the flood tore through the underground, smashing walls, bending pipes, and sweeping away everything in its path. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock clung to the metal railing, the force of the current nearly tearing them apart. Miles Reed, barely conscious, floated between them, his breath short and fading. "Hold on!" Keanu shouted, his voice almost lost under the thunder of rushing water. Sandra's grip slipped, her hand brushing his before catching the rail again. The lights flickered above, the red emergency globe blinking like a dying heartbeat. Each second felt like eternity as they fought against the flood, trying to reach higher ground. The tunnel split into 2 paths, one toward the emergency hatch, the other toward the maintenance shaft. Keanu pointed toward the maintenance side. "It's closer to the surface." Sandra shook her head, panting. "The hatch leads to the control center. If we reach it, we can reroute power and drain the water." They both knew there was no time to argue, but Keanu's eyes softened. "You take the hatch. I'll hold the current here." She stared at him, realizing what he was about to do. "Keanu, no," she said, her voice breaking. He smiled gently, even as water rose to his shoulders. If we both fight the same current, no one survives. You have to lead them out. Before she could protest, he pushed her toward the hatch, shouting, "Go!" Sandra screamed his name as the wave pulled her under for a moment. She emerged, coughing, clutching the metal ladder that led upward. Her heart pounded with fear, pain, and something deeper. The fear of losing someone who always put others first. Keanu watched as she climbed, his body half submerged now. He looked at Miles floating nearby and pulled him closer, keeping his head above the rising water. Miles opened his eyes weakly. Why are you doing this?" Keanu looked at him, his voice soft but steady. "Because someone once saved me when they didn't have to. It's my turn." Up above, Sandra reached the hatch and slammed her shoulder against it. It was jammed shut. She screamed for help, her voice echoing through the pipes, but no one heard. Her hands bled as she tried again and again until finally the metal creaked. She forced it open just enough to crawl through, collapsing on the other side. A blast of cold air hit her face. She was inside a control chamber lit by flickering monitors. The screens showed city streets above, flashing lights, ambulances, people running. The emergency response teams were already working to evacuate nearby stations, but none of them knew that 3 people were still below, fighting for survival. Sandra rushed to the console, soaking wet and trembling. The drive in her pocket still glowed faintly. She plugged it in, and a familiar voice came from the speaker. "Liam, the boy. Is my dad with you? Please tell me he's okay." Sandra's voice cracked as she replied. "He's with Keanu. They're still down there, but we'll bring them back." Liam's small voice trembled. "I know you will. Dad always said kind people never stop trying." Sandra swallowed hard, trying to hide her tears. "You're right, Liam. And we're not stopping now." She typed commands into the console, rerouting the backup energy to the drainage system. The monitors flashed warnings. "Manual control required at lower gate." She realized Keanu would have to trigger it from below. She grabbed the radio and shouted through the static, "Keanu, can you hear me?" No answer. She tried again, her voice louder, more desperate. "Keanu, you have to open the lower gate now. It's the only way out." A crackle came through, then his voice rough but alive. "I hear you. How much time do we have?" Sandra looked at the timer. 3 minutes. Not much. "Please, just make it back." He chuckled softly, even through the chaos. "You sound like someone who still believes in miracles." She smiled through tears. "Maybe I learned that from you." Keanu dragged Miles toward the massive steel gate deep in the tunnel. The floodwater was waist-deep now, pushing against them like a living wall. The lever controlling the gate was rusted and heavy, its handle barely moving. He braced his feet against the wall and pulled with all his strength. Nothing. He tried again, grunting in pain as his wounded arm bled freely. The lever groaned, then finally began to move. Water rushed toward the gate, pressing against it like a beast ready to break free. Miles coughed, his eyes half open. "You'll drown if you open it." Keanu smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Better me than everyone else." The gate creaked open halfway, and a violent rush of water exploded outward. Keanu was thrown backward, slamming into the wall. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he forced himself up again. He grabbed the lever once more and pulled it completely down. The water began to drain through the main channel, lowering inch by inch. Above, Sandra saw the pressure readings drop on her monitor. Her eyes widened. He did it. She immediately activated the emergency elevator, lowering it into the flooded section. "Keanu, hold on." "I'm coming to get you." Down below, Keanu was barely standing now. The cold was seeping into his bones, his breath coming in short gasps. Miles tried to reach for him, but his strength was gone. "Leave me," Miles whispered weakly. "Save yourself." Keanu shook his head. "I'm not leaving anyone behind." As the elevator light appeared from above, Sandra's voice echoed through the intercom. "Grab the cable, Keanu." "I see you." He looked up, blinking against the falling debris and water. For a second, his vision blurred, but then he saw her silhouette above, reaching down. The moment felt frozen. 2 people fighting fate together once again. He lifted Miles onto the cable, securing him first. The mechanism pulled the man upward slowly toward safety. Sandra shouted, "Now you, Keanu!" But before he could grab it, a massive chunk of debris crashed down, smashing the railing beside him. The shockwave threw him backward into the water. "Keanu!" Sandra screamed into the mic. Static filled the air, followed by silence. Her heart raced, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She shouted again, "Keanu, answer me, please!" No reply came, only the faint echo of rushing water. Tears filled her eyes as she watched the empty tunnel below. The elevator reached the top, carrying Miles, barely alive. But Keanu was nowhere to be seen. Sandra fell to her knees, covering her face with her hands. He promised. He promised he'd come back. Miles coughed weakly as paramedics rushed to him. He looked at Sandra with pain in his eyes. "He saved me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He saved all of us." The emergency crew sealed off the area as rescue drones descended. Hours passed before the flood finally cleared. The city above began to calm, unaware of the silent hero who had just vanished below. News headlines flashed everywhere. Subway disaster prevented by unknown rescuers, but no one knew their names. Back at the control center, Sandra sat alone beside the console. The monitors flickered, and the drive in her pocket beeped softly. She pulled it out and plugged it in. A single message appeared on the screen, marked with Keanu's initials. "If you're reading this, it means we made it. Tell them kindness still works." Her tears fell quietly as she stared at the message. She whispered, "You're not gone. Not while your kindness lives." Then a soft sound echoed from the radio beside her. A faint, broken voice. "Bullock, you still owe me that coffee." Her eyes widened, disbelief turning into a flood of relief. "Keanu?" she cried, gripping the mic tightly. The voice came again, weak but smiling. "Told you. Miracles happen." The rescue teams searched through the flooded tunnels for hours before they found him. Keanu Reeves was lying near a broken platform, half buried under debris, breathing faintly. His clothes were torn, his skin pale, but his pulse, weak as it was, still beat steady. When the rescuers pulled him out, the paramedic whispered, "He's alive." Above ground, the crowd cheered, but Sandra Bullock fell silent, her eyes filling with tears of relief as they lifted him onto the stretcher. His hand moved slightly, gripping the edge. His voice was barely a whisper, but she heard it clearly. "Did we save them?" Sandra bent close, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "Yes, Keanu. You saved everyone." The ambulance rushed through the night streets, sirens echoing. Sandra sat beside him, her hand never leaving his. The doctor looked at her and said softly, "He's exhausted, but his vitals are stable." She smiled faintly. "He doesn't rest even when the world does." Hours later, Keanu opened his eyes in the hospital room. The morning sun streamed through the blinds, soft and warm. He turned his head slightly and saw Sandra asleep beside his bed, her head resting on her arm. For the first time since the chaos, peace filled the air. He smiled weakly and whispered, "You stayed." Her eyes opened slowly, her voice still thick with exhaustion. "You think I'd let the hero slip away before breakfast?" He chuckled quietly, wincing at the pain. "I guess kindness runs on coffee." Their laughter broke the tension that had lived in their hearts all night. But deep down, they both knew this wasn't over. Somewhere Miles Reed was still recovering, and his son Liam was waiting for him. The world still didn't know the truth, that the so-called disaster was prevented by 3 people who refused to give up on kindness. As the news spread, journalists camped outside the hospital. Headlines flashed everywhere. "Mystery heroes prevent city tragedy." But no one named Keanu or Sandra, and that was exactly how they wanted it. They didn't want fame. They wanted hope to survive quietly. 2 days later, Keanu and Sandra visited Miles in another ward. Liam was there too, holding his father's hand tightly. When he saw them enter, the boy ran forward and hugged Keanu without hesitation. "Thank you for saving my dad," he said softly. Keanu knelt down, his voice gentle. "No, Liam. Your dad saved everyone. We just helped him remember why." Miles looked weak but peaceful, his eyes red with emotion. "I thought the world had forgotten me," he said quietly. Sandra shook her head, smiling. "You were just waiting for someone to remind you what kindness feels like." Miles looked at the two of them with tears in his eyes. "You reminded me that even after darkness, there's still light." As they talked, the hospital television played news footage of the city's reconstruction. People were volunteering to rebuild the damaged tunnels. The mayor's speech echoed softly through the speakers. Whoever stopped this disaster taught us something far greater than safety. They reminded us that true strength lies in selfless hearts. Keanu turned the volume down and whispered, "See, the world still listens when kindness speaks." Sandra smiled, her eyes glistening. And sometimes, it only takes one person to make everyone else believe again. A few days later, they attended a small private ceremony organized by the rescue team. No cameras, no reporters, just people who had seen the worst and witnessed hope return. Miles stood with a cane, Liam beside him, both wearing quiet smiles. The chief rescuer handed Keanu and Sandra a small metal plaque engraved with 3 words, "For those who didn't give up." Keanu ran his fingers over the words, his eyes distant. "I don't think we deserve this," he said softly. Sandra looked at him, her voice calm and sure. "We do. Not because we were brave, but because we cared." After the ceremony, Keanu stood alone for a moment near the city bridge. The sky above glowed orange with evening light. His reflection rippled in the river below, calm yet full of stories untold. He reached into his pocket and took out a small locket, the same one he had carried for years. Inside was a photo of a woman and a young girl. He whispered to the wind, "I hope I made you proud, Anna." Sandra walked up quietly behind him. "Who were they?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "A mother and her daughter I couldn't save years ago. That day I promised myself I'd never stop trying." Her eyes filled with gentle sadness. "You didn't just save lives this time, Keanu. You kept your promise." He looked at her, his voice quiet but steady. "Kindness doesn't end when life does. It just changes hands." She nodded, wiping a tear that rolled down her cheek. "Then maybe it's our turn to pass it forward." As they stood together, the city lights flickered on one by one, glowing against the twilight. The river carried their reflections, 2 souls who had faced the storm and still chosen compassion. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with everything they had been through and everything they still believed in. Before leaving, Keanu looked at her and said with a half-smile, "You know, Sandra, if I ever write a book about this, I'll call it The Day Kindness Took the Bullet." She laughed softly. "And you'll forget to mention you almost drowned doing it." "Probably," he replied, smiling. "Some stories sound better unfinished." They walked away from the bridge side by side, not as heroes but as reminders. Behind them, a small boy released a paper lantern into the sky. Its flame rose slowly, bright and steady, joining dozens of others floating above the city. People on the bridge watched in silence as the lanterns drifted higher, symbols of hope reborn. As one of the lanterns passed over Keanu's head, he looked up and whispered, "See, Anna." The world remembered. The days turned into weeks, and the chaos slowly faded into memory. The city healed, the people returned to their routines, and the headlines disappeared. But in one quiet hospital wing, the story was still unfinished. Keanu Reeves sat by the window, his arm now bandaged, sunlight spilling across the room. He watched children playing in the courtyard below, their laughter carrying through the glass. Sandra Bullock entered silently, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She smiled. "You still like it black?" He looked at her and nodded with a faint grin. Some things never change. They sat quietly, sipping their coffee in peace for the first time in weeks. No alarms, no gunfire, no rushing water, only stillness. But in that stillness lay something powerful, something that words could not capture. A nurse entered the room, holding a sealed envelope. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "this was found in the wreckage near the tunnels. It has your name on it." Keanu frowned slightly and took the envelope. The paper was damp and burned on the edges, but one thing was clear. It was written in a child's handwriting. He opened it carefully. Inside was a small note and a drawing. The note read, "Dear Mr. Reeves, thank you for saving my dad. He told me heroes wear kindness, not capes. I hope you get better soon. Love, Liam." Below the note was a crayon drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a big heart, labeled Me, Dad, and the Kind Man. Keanu's throat tightened, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. He traced the lines of the drawing with his finger, his eyes soft and wet. Sandra placed a hand on his arm gently. "He drew you as a hero," she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. He drew what the world should be. Outside the window, the morning sky began to shift into gold. People gathered near the rebuilt subway entrance, laying flowers and candles. A small plaque had been placed there, reading, "In honor of the quiet heroes who chose kindness when fear was louder." Sandra and Keanu walked out together later that day to see it. Miles and Liam were already there, standing quietly beside the memorial. When Liam saw them, he ran forward and hugged them both tightly. "Dad says the city made this because of you," he said proudly. Keanu smiled and knelt down to meet his eyes. "No, Liam, they made it because of you. You reminded us why we fight for people." Miles looked at Keanu with gratitude that words couldn't describe. "You gave me a second chance," he said softly. Keanu shook his head. "You gave the world one." For a while, they all stood there together, the boy, his father, and the two who refused to give up. Then a light rain began to fall, soft and warm, as if the sky itself wanted to wash the past away. People didn't run from it this time. They lifted their faces toward it, letting the rain mix with their tears and smiles. As the droplets fell, Sandra whispered, "Funny how every storm ends with light." Keanu nodded slowly. "Because kindness is the part of us even storms can't drown." They walked together through the rain, the crowd parting slightly, silent in respect. Someone in the distance started humming a tune, and soon the sound spread through the street, a quiet melody of gratitude. Lanterns began to float again, this time from every corner of the city. Golden lights filled the dark sky, drifting upward like small promises. A reporter approached quietly, holding out a microphone. "Mr. Reeves, the world wants to know why did you risk everything?" Keanu paused, looking at the glowing sky, then spoke softly. "Because kindness isn't a choice. It's who we are when no one is watching." The reporter lowered the microphone, unable to say another word, and the crowd, instead of cheering, simply stood in silence, a silence of understanding. Later that evening, Keanu and Sandra returned to the same bridge where it had all started. The river reflected the lanterns like stars floating on water. Sandra leaned on the railing, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's strange. The city moved on, but I still feel it. That moment when we thought it was over." Keanu nodded. "It never really ends. Kindness doesn't fade. It just finds new people to carry it forward." As they stood there, a faint voice called from behind them. It was Liam holding a small paper wrapped in string. "Dad said I should give this to you," he said, handing it to Keanu. Inside was a folded letter, written by Miles. It read, "If you're reading this, it means we all survived. But more importantly, it means kindness did too. I once thought the world forgot me, but you reminded me that people still care. Thank you for saving not just lives, but hope itself. Miles Reed." Keanu folded the letter gently and looked at Sandra. "You think we can keep this going?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "We already are." They looked up at the night sky together. The lanterns were still floating, and among them, one shone brighter than the rest. It drifted closer before vanishing into the clouds, like a sign that kindness never truly leaves. As the final light faded, Keanu turned to Sandra, his voice calm and full of peace. "We didn't take the bullet," he said softly. "We caught it, so no one else had to." She looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. And the world finally learned what real heroes look like. They walked away, the sound of rain mixing with quiet laughter, their silhouettes framed against the shimmering city. And in that moment, the world felt different, not because tragedy was avoided, but because kindness had finally won. The final line of the news broadcast that night said it best. They saved a city, but what they truly saved was faith in humanity.